The McDonald's was packed with customers, the smell of fries and fresh burgers filling the air. The line stretched to the door, people chatting as they waited for their orders. Then, a man in sweatpants and a hoodie walked in, unnoticed by most. He quietly took his place in line, waiting like everyone else. But the manager spotted him immediately. Her eyes narrowed. She stepped forward, crossing her arms. "We do not allow loitering," she said, her voice sharp. "If you are not buying anything, you need to leave." The man nodded and walked out without a word. What happened next? It left the entire store in shock. Christian McCaffrey had just finished an intense workout. He was tired, hungry, and looking for a quick bite before heading home. He pulled into a busy McDonald's parking lot, stepping out in a simple hoodie and sweatpants. Nothing about him screamed, "NFL superstar." He looked like any other customer grabbing a meal after a long day. As he entered, he blended into the crowd. The restaurant was packed. Families sitting at booths, employees rushing to fill orders, the smell of fries and fresh burgers thick in the air. He took his place in line, waiting patiently. But someone had already noticed him. The store manager. She was a middle-aged woman, dressed in a buttoned-up uniform, standing near the counter. She watched him with a look of instant judgment. To her, he did not look like a paying customer. He looked like a problem. She walked straight toward him, her expression stiff. "Sir," she said, her tone already dismissive, "we do not allow loitering. If you are not buying anything, you need to leave." McCaffrey blinked, taken aback. He had not even gotten to the counter yet. "I was about to order," he said, keeping his voice polite. The manager rolled her eyes. "Sure you were." A few nearby customers turned their heads, sensing the tension. Some of the younger employees, standing behind the counter, suddenly recognized him. Their eyes widened in disbelief. Before they could say anything, McCaffrey simply nodded, turned, and walked out. No argument, no scene, just a quiet exit. The manager smirked to herself, satisfied, another freeloader out of her store. But the employees, they were still frozen, watching the doors swing shut. One of them turned to the manager, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know who that was?" She barely looked at him. "I do not care," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "He is not my problem anymore." Oh, but he was, because what happened next would leave her standing in complete humiliation. The McDonald's manager smirked, watching Christian McCaffrey walk out the door. To her, he was just another customer who did not belong in her store. But behind the counter, the employees stood frozen, exchanging wide-eyed glances. "That was Christian McCaffrey," one whispered. Another worker gasped. "The NFL player? The one who just signed a huge contract?" The realization spread like wildfire among the staff, but the manager? She was oblivious. "Are you sure?" she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "He did not look like a millionaire to me." One of the younger employees shook his head in disbelief. "Yeah, because rich people walk around wearing gold chains and tuxedos all the time, right?" The group of workers murmured among themselves, already sensing that the manager had just made a massive mistake. Meanwhile, customers who had witnessed the interaction whispered to each other. Some recognized McCaffrey too late. By the time they realized what had happened, he was already gone. The atmosphere inside the store shifted. Something was about to happen, and 15 minutes later, it did. Outside, the sound of engines revving caught everyone's attention, not just one, but multiple cars. A fleet of blacked-out luxury SUVs and sports cars pulled into the parking lot, one after the other. People turned their heads, craning their necks to see who was arriving. Some even pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Then, the doors to the first SUV swung open, and out stepped Christian McCaffrey. But he was not alone. Behind him, his teammates, coaches, and staff emerged one by one. The group was massive, More than a dozen people all walking toward the McDonald's entrance like they were about to make a statement. Inside, the employees gasped, their jaws dropping. The manager, who had been so dismissive earlier, felt her stomach twist. The doors swung open. McCaffrey walked in first, calm and composed. He went straight to the counter, looked the manager in the eyes and said, "I would like to place a very large order." The entire store went silent. The manager's face? Pure panic. The McDonald's manager froze. Her smug confidence from earlier vanished in an instant. Christian McCaffrey stood at the counter, calm and composed, his eyes locked onto hers. Behind him, a line of teammates, coaches, and staff stretched to the door. The store had never seen anything like this. The employees behind the counter whispered among themselves, barely able to contain their shock. The manager swallowed hard, her face turning pale. McCaffrey leaned slightly forward. "I would like to place a very large order." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one moved. The manager fumbled for words. I did not realize who you were," she stammered. McCaffrey raised an eyebrow. Would it have mattered? The question hit like a punch. She tried to backtrack. "No, I thought—" McCaffrey held up a hand, cutting her off. "Do not worry about it," he said. "I am still hungry." Then he turned to the cashier, not the manager, but a young employee standing off to the side, the same one who had recognized him earlier. "How about you take my order instead?" McCaffrey said with a small smile. The employee lit up, nodding quickly. "Yes, sir." McCaffrey turned back to his group. "Order whatever you want, guys, I got it." The teammates and staff stepped forward, rattling off their orders. Big Macs, Quarter Pounders, fries, McFlurries. The list kept growing. Then McCaffrey turned back to the cashier. "And also," he gestured to the crowd of customers watching in stunned silence, "whatever they want too. It's on me." The store erupted into cheers. Customers clapped, some even shouted his name. The employees stood frozen, processing what just happened. The manager? She could barely breathe. McCaffrey had done more than just prove her wrong. He had turned the moment into something unforgettable. As the workers rushed to fill the massive order, the once smug manager stood in silence, fully realizing the mistake she had made. McCaffrey had not raised his voice. He had not argued. He had just changed the entire store's energy with one simple move, and he was not even done yet. The McDonald's manager stood frozen, her face still drained of color. She had spent the entire morning barking orders, judging customers, and assuming she knew exactly who belonged in her store. And now, she was standing in the middle of the biggest moment of her career, for all the wrong reasons. Christian McCaffrey stood at the counter, laughing with teammates, shaking hands with customers, and treating every employee with respect, except her. The other workers hurried to prepare the massive order, their hands shaking from both excitement and nerves. The energy in the store had completely shifted. The manager finally found her voice. I want to apologize," she stammered, stepping forward slightly. McCaffrey barely glanced at her. "For what?" She hesitated, realizing there was no right answer. "For the misunderstanding," she finally said. "I did not mean to—" McCaffrey smiled, but it was not the friendly kind. "No, you meant exactly what you did," he said. "And that is the problem." The customers fell silent, hanging on to every word. The manager's throat tightened. I did not realize who you were." McCaffrey chuckled, shaking his head. "And if I was not me? If I was just some guy who walked in looking for a meal, would I still have deserved that treatment?" The store stayed silent. Even the kitchen staff paused what they were doing, waiting for her answer. The manager had nothing to say. McCaffrey finally sighed and looked over at the cashier who had taken his order. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed the young worker a $500 tip. "You treated me with respect," he said. "That is what matters. The worker's eyes widened in shock. Oh my God. Thank you, sir. McCaffrey turned to the rest of the employees. Everyone gets the same, he said. You all work hard. This is for you. One by one, he handed out $500 tips to every worker. The employees cheered, some wiping tears from their eyes. The manager? She stood in silence, watching as her employees, her own staff, celebrated the same man she had kicked out. And at that moment she realized she had lost far more than just a customer. The atmosphere inside the McDonald's had completely shifted. Just minutes ago, it had been a regular fast food restaurant. Now, it felt like something bigger was happening. Christian McCaffrey had not just returned, he had taken over the moment. The employees who had been working tirelessly all day now stood with wide eyes, some of them still in shock, clutching their $500 tips. A few whispered excitedly to each other, while others simply stood frozen, unsure if this was really happening. The customers in line? They were cheering. Some clapped, others pulled out their phones to capture the moment, and a few even shouted McCaffrey's name. The only person not celebrating was the manager. She stood rigid, hands clasped in front of her, face flushed with embarrassment. Her employees, the ones she had ordered around all day, were looking at McCaffrey like he was a hero. And what about her? She had become the villain of her own store. McCaffrey finally turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "Let me ask you something," he said, his voice steady. The room fell silent again. "If I had walked in here wearing a suit, or if I had pulled up in a flashy car, would you have treated me differently?" The manager pressed her lips together, avoiding eye contact. I did not mean to." McCaffrey held up a hand. "I am not looking for excuses. I just want an honest answer." She hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she let out a shaky breath. "Probably." A few employees shook their heads. Customers muttered under their breath. McCaffrey nodded slowly, letting that truth hang in the air. "You see," he said, "the problem is not that you did not recognize me. The problem is that you judged me before you even knew who I was." The manager had no response. McCaffrey exhaled and took one last look around the store. "This is a lesson," he said. "For you, for all of us." He glanced back at his teammates. "All right, let's eat." The restaurant erupted into cheers again. The manager? She just stood there, fully realizing the mistake she had made. And there was nothing she could do to fix it. Christian McCaffrey did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He let his actions speak louder than words. The manager tried to judge him based on appearance, but in the end, she was the one who was judged. Some people look down on others before they even know their story. McCaffrey? He turned the moment into something unforgettable, with class, generosity, and a lesson that store would never forget. What do you think? Should he have called her out even harder? Comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful NFL stories.